Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well. Thanks for asking, Rory. Both Rory and I are thrilled you've joined us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Today's episode 276, 3 stops on the journey, starting at student services, where we're going to be delving down below the ground and looking at potatoes. We're going to be speaking about Carl Rogers' potato observation and seeing how does that link to actualization of self and hopes that we may have as we kind of come into maybe a new year of study. We then move smoothly onto that ethical, sustainable practice where we recognize there's so much to running a practice that we may not be taught in our core training. And today we're going to be looking at client-centered ethics and that navigating outcomes and limitations in therapy. Sometimes we have to have difficult conversations with clients. So we're going to be delving deep into that. And then we go into practice matters. That is the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, where today you speak, Rory, to Richard Rotberg about career counselling. So kind of when somebody comes into counselling and they're speaking about their career, how might you work with that? But kicking us off, starter for 10, Rory, potatoes and counselling.
Yes, long-term listeners to the podcast will know my love of Carl Rogers and my love of his writing. And in his last book, A Way of Being, which was published in 1980, I think, just about 5 years before he died, he talks about his experience as a child at Glenallen, which was the farm he moved to. The Rogers family moved to a farm called in Glenallen when Rogers was about 12. And Rogers spent a lot of time in the natural world looking at flowers and plants, and obviously it was a farm, so everything around farming. And one particular day, he went into the basement of the farm and he saw a potato bin. And he writes about this in his book, and he speaks about seeing these impoverished potatoes that hadn't got any light or very little light or little water, who'd been popped in a bin, and they were sprouting. They were sprouting towards the little light, little window in the basement, still trying to be the best they could be. And he said that in dealing with clients whose lives have been terribly warped, in working with men and women on the back wards of state hospitals, I often think of these potato sprouts. So unfavourable have been the conditions in which these people have developed that their lives seem often abnormal, twisted, scarcely human, yet the directional tendency in them can be trusted. And he said the clue to understanding their behaviour is that they are striving. It's the only way they can perceive as available to them to move towards growth, towards becoming to be healthy persons. The results may seem bizarre and futile, but they are life's desperate attempts to become itself. And, through the arc of our practices and maybe in our own lives, we may come across people who maybe in addictions may be struggling with personal issues, may act out, is a term that's sometimes used. But even in that, all behavior is goal-directed. What Rogers was speaking about was everybody is really trying to be the best they can be. And sometimes people just may be doing that by very difficult paths. And if we can understand the goal of someone's behavior, then we're better able to meet them where they are.
Wow. That is really, really so powerful. And I guess when you're speaking about the potatoes, potatoes generally grow underground, so you might think, oh, they don't need any light. But of course, they put stems up and they put leaves up that need the light. They're there to photosynthesize. They need water. They need the right kind of soil, I guess, to flourish and to thrive. But without the basic ingredients, they still tried their best. Those potatoes, they still went towards the light as best they could. They were probably yellow instead of green, but they were still, it's almost like a life force of actualizing, being a potato and doing the best it can in the circumstances it finds itself. And we can see that so often in therapy. There are horrendous paths that some have walked. We call them survivors often, and they sometimes go on to become motivational speakers, speaking about what they have come through. And that is a real, I think, great link to the theory that kind of underpins this that you've written about, Rory, and that is self-actualization. So how do we link this that we're speaking about to that self-actualization? What do we mean?
Well, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with the term soil. Rogers also wrote that therapists should be soil of a different kind. And the idea that as therapists, we're producing that unconditional positive regard, congruence, we're real in the therapy room, we're non-judgmental, we try to see the client's perspective, their frame of reference. And by understanding that and by the client feeling heard, that gives us the hope and the potential that people may wish to change, that people, once they've spoken about what's going on for them, may be able to self-reflect and kind of self-direct themselves. And, Rogers spoke about that in the 19 proposition, his theory of personality. He talks about in the absence of threat, people can be themselves. And it's that non-threatening environment in the therapy room which promotes this growth. And I think that it can't be too understated that there's lots of counselling theories out there, but person-centered therapy really does rely on the quality of the therapeutic relationship and the quality of the three facilitative conditions of empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard. And in fact, the research pretty much says that most therapy relies on that. The quality of the relationship is a big indicator of success. And I think if you're studying, maybe you're doing an introduction course, or you're doing, maybe a certificate or diploma, or you may be doing higher qualifications, not to lose sight of that. For all the information and all the theory that's you may be taught, the main ingredient for therapeutic relationships is that you realize the client is doing their best, and you're trying to meet them where they're at, using those facilitative conditions.
I like it. The soil of a different kind, as you kind of beautifully framed it there. And Rory, when we look at this, we recognize that many who will sit in a counseling chair or present for therapy have been denied or kept away, like the potatoes were kept away from the light, and the proper food have been kept away, maybe from love. Maybe they are judged for what they may say. Maybe they view themselves with low regard because they see that reflected around them by others. And it's the conditions that would hold one in a fixed place. And coming into therapy, as you said, Rory, all of a sudden is that soil of a different kind. All of a sudden there is empathy. I want to hear what you have to say, and I'm going to empathize, not criticize, empathize with what you are going through. I'm almost going to go on that journey with you and see it through your eyes, and I'm going to kind of feed back to you so that you can understand that I'm understanding you. You are being heard. Sometimes just being heard is massive for many that would come into counselling. And then not being judged by the therapist. And we can see this when a client may come into therapy. Not all clients, of course, I'm just using this as an example. We may see them testing the relationship. We may see them throwing out something about themselves or their life and looking at us to see how we react to that. Do we judge them? Do we pull a face when they mention that? Or do we receive what they say without judgment, with unconditional positive regard of that human being in front of us, with warmth? And that is that soil of a different kind. And the theory showing that just that soil of a different kind can lead to growth for that person.
Absolutely. And through my years of supervising, I met many supervisees who said, I don't really think anything's happened to this client. They're not much different from when they came to when they left. And my response is always the same. I say, but they spent time with you. They had the opportunity to explore what was going on for them. And you don't know how that short encounter may very well affect their entire lifetime. And Rogers, in fact, referred to this. He said, don't underestimate how the encounter with a therapist may alter someone's life, the directionality of their life. It's incredibly powerful. For those who've had therapy, it is a very empowering, very incredible place where you're sat in front of somebody who is offering you those conditions, and you can be yourself. You can be yourself.
Wow.
And that is something that is a luxury for some people. It's a luxury for some people. But in that space, you can be yourself. And in being yourself, you meet yourself, and you can decide who you want to be. You can decide the directionality of your life.
So powerful. So powerful, Rory. And within that therapeutic environment, just our way of being, how we are and how we present can provide that environment without us having to say anything, without us having to go to a list of counseling skills that I've got to now reflect and I've got to now paraphrase and I've now got to focus in. Just us being there provides that soil of a different kind. And if we're looking to the person-centered model of counseling, we're aware that it is non-directive. Within person-centered counseling, we are trusting that client to find their own way. We're not going to say, this is the path, this is what you need to do. Whoa, that's going on. Right, what I suggest you do now is this. We're not doing that. We're trusting them to find the way. And I think that really keys into that self-actualization, that trust that we have in that client, that they can grow, that they can move kind of past what may be holding them back. And sometimes when the client comes in, they don't even trust themselves. They don't even trust their own self to be able to get out of there. So having another person who puts their full trust in you is a magical thing. I think self-actualization, and I'm not talking self-actualization as in sitting at the top of Maslow's pyramid. I'm saying moving up the pyramid, moving and kind of, I guess, developing in self is a magical thing. And I wonder if it's a life force, Rory. This is just me pondering now. If it is a life force that is in us and that we see in nature. And I wonder if that's not what Carl Rogers noticed, looking at the potatoes and going, wow, look at that life force that's driving it, even in these harsh conditions, to be the best it can be. I wonder if that's universal. That's just me musing.
Well, I mean, I think you've hit on an interesting point there. Force of life is the miracle of seeing, a weed break through concrete, or a life form at the bottom of the deepest oceans just pottering around, where a human couldn't withstand the pressures of the water. So yes, I think that there is a force of life in everything that lives. And, as we understand that, and certainly as we understand that with a client, I think if there's a magic ingredient in therapy, it's just being present for the client, just allowing them to harness their own force of life and understanding that no matter how a client may present, they're probably trying to find a goal of their behavior. There's a goal to the behavior they're exhibiting. And if you can both understand what the goal is, then I think that people can change. They understand that they want to be, better or more loved or more wanted. Then, if you're in the therapy room and you're really present and really, really caring, then there's a good chance that person will find out who they are and may be able to alter or just change their goals. In my experience of being a therapist, more is less. There have been times in my earlier career where I've been really on fire in my reflecting and my paraphrasing and my interventions. And at the end of it, I'm not quite sure, in my earlier career, I wasn't quite sure how much effect that had had. But I'm damn sure that when I just sat and listened and was very minimal in my reflections and just really in the client's frame of reference, that magic happened. I've seen it in my chair time and time again, Ken.
Yeah, it is. It's a very special kind of magic. I've got a big smile on my face when you mentioned that, Rory. And I like how you said that more is less, and of course less is more. We don't have to be in there to kind of cheer the client on. We trust in them. And I remember with our students, it's kind of, I didn't know what skill to use in that situation. When you're unsure, just staying silent is sometimes the best option, just allowing that space for that client to reflect, to think about what they've said, to process, and of course trusting that they're going to find their way in that silence. We don't always have to be in there kind of with our toolkit wondering what tool do we need now, just trusting in that client. And of course Rory has created a great handout for this, and I think that this handout is really useful for a student. If you're a student, you're studying counselling, there's going to come a time where you're going to be asked to link a case study of a client's journey that you might work with in placement to the theory, your core theory that you're studying. And if your core theory is person-centered, then having this handout is really useful, because if you do see any progress in that client by providing that soil of a different kind, you can refer to the theory. You can refer to Carl Rogers' famous potato observations, and you can get Carl Rogers' famous potato observation handout by going to counsellingtutor.com. You're going to want to click on the podcast tab on our website. Get yourself to episode 276, and that handout is free. You can download it right there in the page. What I like about this handout, Rory, is it goes over the potato observation, but it also gives a direct reference to where this came from, that Way of Being book, published in New York by Houghton Mifflin. So it's all there. You've got the actual reference as well. So really useful if you're writing an assignment. Thank you for creating that, Rory.
Yes, no problem at all. And what I would say, Ken, is that it's not just person-centered therapy that benefits from this kind of soil of a different kind. I think the research is in, and everybody would agree, no matter what modality you're practicing, the ability to form and sustain a relationship is a big indicator on positive client outcomes.
Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively? Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit counsellingskillsacademy.com to learn more and to claim your counselling tutor discount. That's counsellingskillsacademy.com. And as we move away now from our student services into that ethical, sustainable practice, a really good topic. When I looked at this topic, Rory, I thought, wow, this can go really deep. And I guess we've only got a fixed amount of time we can spend on it on the podcast. But the topic is client-centered ethics. We speak about ethics all the time in counselling, but navigating outcomes, limitations in therapy. And I'm thinking, Rory, even ethics like a client presenting and them not being a right fit for us, not having the right skill set for them. Sometimes we have to ethically have difficult conversations that go against, I guess, what the business, because if you're running a business as a therapist, you want clients and you want clients to come. And sometimes we have to have those discussions where we might say to a client, this is not going to be a fit.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And this comes up quite a lot in our Facebook page. And if you want to join our Facebook page, type Counselling Tutor into Facebook, click, and in you go, and you'll see a lot of conversations around this. And I think one of the interesting factors is when you're a student therapist, what happens is you turn up at your placement, you allocated a client, you allocated a fixed number of sessions. It could be 6, it could be 12, it could be more than that. But the sessions are free. The client usually doesn't pay for them. And people come and they talk about their difficulties, and every session there's no fee. When you move into being a paid therapist, you have to be a little bit like my roofer who came to fix the west wing of Counselling Towers recently, and who went up on the roof next to the tower. I'm only joking, I don't have a tower in the house. And just in case anybody did think I lived in some kind of neo-Gothic stately home. And he said, oh yes, your vis tiles need pointing, and and the LED flashings need doing, and it's going to cost so much. And I knew when he came off his ladder how much I had to get out of the cash point. It was as simple as that. Now, with therapy, if someone's coming to you as a paid therapist to pay, and they have a really difficult issue, the question I'm asking, and there's no kind of right or wrong answer to this, is it ethical to say to the client, this may be more than a few sessions? Someone's going to talk about a real series of traumatic events and has a goal of trying to be free from it, then I think ethically, someone who's charging should say, this could be a number of sessions and maybe we review it after so many. And then the client has the opportunity to say, okay, I'm committed to this, or I didn't realize it could cost that much. And, because we're in difficult times at the moment, people have got, cost of living and that type of thing. And I think it's only fair. And you can do that, I think, just by giving people, well, we could perhaps look at this for a number of sessions or this for a number of sessions. But I think it's a change of mindset, because if you've been working in a free pro bono environment where you're offering, say, 20 sessions, it's easy to keep that mindset when you're doing a paid and thinking, well, just come back. And the thing is, they're paying for this. And that's the big difference. And you're right, Ken, sometimes we may meet a client, have a couple of sessions, and realize that actually what they need is something different. One of the things that came up quite a lot for me when I was in practice was couples. It became clear that the person said, I think I need my partner to come. I think we should have couples therapy. Well, I'm not a couples trained therapist, so there was a referral. But we have to be thoughtful when people are paying, when they're on the clock, to make sure they understand, the financial aspects of being in therapy, and also they're getting the right therapy.
Definitely. I agree with that, Rory. And I guess it's sometimes difficult to place ourselves in the mindset of a client coming in. And I'm going to parallel this to doing our own personal therapy during counselling training. Yeah, when we do our own personal therapy during counselling training, there's usually a requirement of how many hours that may be, and it's going to be dependent on the course that you're doing. You'll have a certain amount of hours you need to do. And it's kind of set. You know what that is, and it's discussed with your peers. When a client is coming in, they have no reference at all, often, to what therapy is, how long therapy might go on for, and what one can sort within therapy, or what realistic goals are in therapy. And there's the thinking in person-centered therapy, that it is client-directed. And it might be tempting to say, when the client says, well, I wonder how many sessions I might need with this, it might be tempting to use a person-centered reply and say, well, this is person-centered therapy. It's led by you. It's as long as you want to engage. But I wonder, with what we're talking about today, if sometimes we don't need to look at that client-centered ethics and give a more direct and real answer to that. In kind of what you've brought up, Rory, if somebody has got many instances of trauma in the past and they're looking to be free of that, chances are it can take, well, in some instances, it can take many years. And I think we need to have that conversation with the client as you're kind of outlining that. But it can feel like it goes against the base modality. I'm person-centered. I shouldn't be telling them how many sessions they should or could have. They should be deciding that themselves. But sometimes we need to go into that client-centered ethics part and have that conversation with them, because it is in service of that client and it is reflective of congruence.
Absolutely, Ken. And you don't need to give them an exact number of sessions. I think if someone came to me with a very difficult, traumatized childhood, I may very well say to them, having done an assessment, the half-hour free assessment to see if you can work together and if you're a good fit, both ways, I might say this might not be a short process. This could be, a longer engagement in therapy, and you can leave it there. You don't have to set. It'll be 9 weeks for this and 14 weeks for that. But you can say this could be a rather longer engagement, in my experience, than perhaps a shorter one. But why don't we review it after 6? You should do a 6-week review, in my view, anyway. A 6-week review and just see, how you are, and let's look at, maybe one area that you'd like to look at. And I think that collaborative way of working is fair to the client, and it's fair to yourself as well, because a lot of clients don't have a clue about how therapy works, about, what happens, about the process. And, even down to the fact that I would say to clients, and I'll be honest with you, sometimes it can get a little more difficult before it gets better. As you start stirring up the sediment, lots of stuff rises to the surface and it can feel rather uncomfortable. But in my experience, it settles again once you've gone through that process. So most people are open to that kind of analogy.
Yeah, and revisit your contract. So once you've had that discussion, you might want to add that into your contract in some way, specifically, as you were saying, Rory, that we're going to review after 6 weeks, and then you as the client may decide on how that might look going forward. But having the talk with them beforehand gives them a fuller picture. Because for me, there's nothing sadder than perhaps getting to a 6-week review, the client thinking that 6 weeks is what it's going to take for me to get through my stuff. The client feeling at 6 weeks that they've built up rapport, that this is going well, they're starting to feel or see some changes within their lives, only to kind of realize after the 6-week review that there's a lot of work still to do, and perhaps they don't have the money for that. And them having to walk away from that is serving them at the time that they're feeling that benefit from it. If we've had that discussion beforehand, covered it somewhere in our contract, and we're reviewing that after 6 weeks, then we've already had that discussion. The client knows what to expect, I guess, Rory.
Absolutely, and I think it's only fair, and you can be creative. I mean, I think sometimes in therapy we're wedded to the weekly session situation, and for some, I think the weekly session is useful. But sometimes, I mean, I've worked with clients who have gone to a 2-weekly session after the process has started, and then may see them monthly. And I had a peer who sees her therapist once a year on the anniversary of the death of a child. And she goes and she sees the therapist once a year to process where she is. So I think there's lots of creative ways around this. We mustn't get too wedded to, has to be one session every week, has to be, in the same time. I think we can work with the client's preferences, and we should be free to maybe make a suggestion. If we think the client's struggling, say, well, could try 2 weekly, if that would be helpful, and help the client where we can. But the point I'm coming to, it's a big step, isn't it, from being a placement therapist in an agency where you're giving it away for free to actually charging for it. And I think that's the step change in mindset that you need to adopt if you're in private practice. The idea that people just come week in, week out for 6 or 12 weeks might not be kind of sustainable.
If you have any ideas or thoughts about this client-centered ethics and how you navigate outcomes with your clients, then we'd be really grateful if you'd share that in the Facebook group. I think this is a topic of discussion where we can all learn from one another. I've certainly learned from you today, Rory, and we lift one another when we share our thoughts. Rory's already told you where that is. Facebook, put in Counselling Tutor, bob on in, and share your thoughts on this as we kind of back out of ethical, sustainable practice into Practice Matters, Rory, where you met up with Richard Rotberg, career counselling.
Yes, I love my job. I meet some really, really interesting people, and I met by accident. I was meeting someone else, and he happened to mention that his uncle had written a book, and his uncle was Richard Rotberg, a very well respected psychologist in the United States of America, and he's written a book on managing career problems in therapy, and this is what he had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
One of the joys about doing my job is I meet interesting people from all walks of therapy and indeed all parts of the world. So it's my great pleasure to talk today to Richard Rotberg, who's a retired American psychologist who's written a book called Understanding Managing Career Problems in Therapy, What Therapists and Career Counsellors Should Know About Each Other. So, Richard, thank you for joining us, and you're very welcome.
Good to be here, Rory.
So I wonder what motivated you to write your book?
Sure. My background, as you said, was as a psychologist, but I spent my career in a large agency in Chicago that provided career counseling, educational counseling, vocational rehabilitation services to a very wide variety of people. And because we were very well known, we would get calls from psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, when they came across a client who expressed a problem in career. And we would accept the referral, and we would pretty soon find out that it was not always a career problem. It was often an underlying psychological, behavioral, emotional issue that the client brought to the workplace. You know, we don't leave our personalities at the door when we go to work in the morning. And sometimes these are the issues that are really the case. Well, most career counselors are not trained to do therapy. And I've found very few psychologists or psychiatrists who are trained to do career work. So the idea of the book is to help therapists explore these so-called career problems before making a referral, to determine whether it's really a career issue that should be referred, and who to refer to and how to do that, or an underlying problem that should remain in treatment. The book provides method and technique to make these differentiations for therapists. It's an easy read for people. They can gain a lot of information about the world of work, about what is really career testing, what do career counselors really do, how to make a better referral. And there are a number of benefits, I think, for therapists to get into a discussion with their clients or patients about what they do in life. I can spell that out a little more if you want.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Obviously, the American experience is slightly different to here in the UK, but I do think that sometimes therapists may come across a client who's just talking about their issues in the career, and a therapist may think maybe that's something that it should be more coaching. In the UK, we have a big coaching community, or maybe explored by someone who's a career person. And I think you're absolutely right. They may miss the underlying emotional issue that is playing out within this person's life that affects the work. So I think it's really important that we don't refer too quickly, which is, I think, what you're alluding to. We don't just make a referral and think, well, that's actually not really therapy. That's something else. What struck me about the book is that you break down a lot of this information very succinctly.
Well, I try to write with a voice that is without jargon. These are concepts that are easy to understand. The differentiation between a career problem and a real underlying emotional problem is easy to determine if you have the right questions to ask. And I found that therapists are not usually comfortable asking people about their clients' work. Even the simple question, tell me what you do. When they ask that question, people get comfortable. It's easy to talk about employment, and it's fun and beneficial for clients to talk about the strength in their life, the achievements, the accomplishments they've had. And this is a benefit for the therapist because it drops defenses. Clients become more comfortable in talking to the therapist. Nobody's going to read their mind. They're open about the issues. And I found that if you ask people about their careers, they will tell you all sorts of problems about difficulty with authority, difficulty with co-workers, or people they supervise. And there's a parallel with the family. If you don't get along with your father, you may not get along with your boss, and so forth. The benefit for the therapist is that when they talk to people about their strengths and their successes, it enhances the therapeutic alliance. It makes it easier to get into other problems. The clients relax and they're comfortable talking to you. And this is, I taught career psychology at Northwestern University for a number of years. Nobody really wanted to take my class because they didn't understand what it was. And it wasn't until I told them, I'll make you a better therapist if you learn how to talk to people about their jobs. You'll be a stronger therapist and you'll enhance your relationships. So that's a big part of the book. And in addition to the description of all these different problems that I deal with, there are 23 case illustrations, most of them cases I had where there was an underlying issue that should have been kept or could have been kept, and others which were really career issues that should have been referred. And I think it helps to understand how to make the differentiation, when to keep, when to send.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting. And one of the things I picked up on is that it might be that there's something going on for the client in their history. You know, you said if they don't get on with their boss, and it might be they didn't get on with their father, and it seems to me like a wonderful opportunity to kind of, you know, by asking the clients about their employment. It seems a wonderful opportunity to kind of open up other avenues of exploration onto where the client's having difficulty. I'm guessing that if they're having a problem with the boss, they may have had problems with other authority figures through their lives.
I had an interesting case. A man came to see me who was a supervisor in a manufacturing company, and he was fired from every job he had. And I like to explore people's history because it often gives me more information than any psychological test. And I I got into his history, and I found out this man was in the Marines, the U.S. Marines. And I said, well, tell me something. If you can't get along with authority, how did you get along in the Marine Corps? He said, oh, I never had problems with authority in the Marine Corps. I said, why not? He said, well, if you mouth off to a sergeant, they'll pull you out behind the barracks and beat the hell out of you. So I said, well, then how did you manage it? He said, well, I just outsmarted them. I said, well, why don't you outsmart your bosses the same way? He got a funny look on his face, and I never saw him again. And this is one of my case studies. And the following Christmas, I got a big tin of cookies, biscuits, I think you would call them.
Yeah.
With a note saying, thank you. I'm working as a supervisor again, and I'm doing very well. Okay, so history, values, intelligence, aptitude, they all go into the recipe of good career counseling. But a lot of it is just plain psychology too.
Yes, absolutely. I wonder how many people's problems are actually generated by the world of work. It seems to me that, in my experience as a therapist, I've had a fair number of clients whose difficulties were with their work, that they struggled with their work, their workloads or their relationships. And I wonder, how big a presenting issue do you think this is for therapists?
Well, I think that most therapists should explore the client's employment, because you're right on target here. In many professions, for example, there is a great deal of pressure to perform. Doctors, for example, in this country are pressured to see so many clients per hour. It puts a lot of pressure on. I can't do the job properly. The FedEx drivers, the people who make deliveries, are all on computers, and they're being forced to produce more and more. The people who work for large companies are pressured, and this causes a lot of anxiety. It causes a lot of burnout because they can't meet the deadlines and the schedules that are set for them. So the workplace has become increasingly more difficult to be in and more pressure to be in. And there's lots and lots of problems and lots of strikes and lots of anger in the workplace.
Absolutely. I would say it's the same here in the UK. We have our groceries delivered by a supermarket, and the guy's truck has got a GPS system in it and a tracker, and if they spend too long, they get a phone call from their supervisor saying, why have you parked in this street for so long when you should be doing all these deliveries? So I think it's a universal problem in developed, industrialized countries. In the book, you talk about volatility and changes in the job market. Now, this has been something that clients have presented with to me a lot, where their jobs may be seasonal, unstable, or their job may be disappearing, and this can cause a lot of anxiety. What's your observations about working with clients who may have volatility in terms of their work?
Before I wrote the book, I read 3 other books about the job market and about volatility. And one of the pressuring issues is that the job market is not only changing all the time, it's changing faster. The technology that's behind many companies now, people can't keep up with the technological changes. And the changes, you can't outrun a computer. If everything is being run by computers and tracked by computers, it just puts a great deal of pressure on many people. Can't keep up with it, and so they need to reframe sometimes the work they're in and look for other work. But this is a major problem throughout the technical world, the modern world.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there'll be people listening to this whom that might resonate with. I'm sure there'll be people listening to this interview who will be in that position of unstable employment or their employment disappearing with, the growth of maybe AI or the growth of technology in the world of work. I mean, the world of work's changed dramatically since we had COVID in this country. I'm sure it's the same in the States as well. We had lockdowns over here, and as a consequence of that, when we came out of the lockdown, the world had changed, and certainly the world of employment had changed. I wonder, what do you think would be your advice for a therapist who is working with a client who's got problems with their work and maybe on the precipice of saying, well, maybe you need to see a coach? What would you think a therapist would have to think about to be able to take that thought out of the head and work more relationally, more therapeutically?
I think the therapists have to first get comfortable in asking questions of their clients about the nature of the problem in the workplace. And in the book, I give a number of questions that therapists could use to open up a conversation. They don't have to be afraid of anything that's going to come out. They don't need to understand the individual's business. They need to understand the pressures that the individual has. And they need to be able to differentiate those issues. It may be, I have a lot of people that came and said, I want to change my career. And I wouldn't let them change a career because it's a hard thing to change your career, especially if you have training, education, licenses, and so forth. Very often the solution is finding out what's wrong in the work setting with them. Is it too much pressure? Is it the wrong kind of company? Do their values clash? I've seen numerous lawyers who want to change professions because their values are different than the company's, and they're forced to do things that they really are unhappy about doing. Well, I don't let them change their career. I help them find a setting where their values fit more closely, and that removes the pressure. So the book details the different kinds of issues that clients will raise and explores how the therapist can think about them for the purpose of making either a referral or working with the client about what his issue is and that they should continue to talk about it.
I think that's a really interesting response because I think everybody I've ever worked with I'm talking about clients here, who struggled with employment, when you got down to it, it was a values match. Their values were very different to their organisation's values. And, sometimes they didn't realise it. Sometimes when you said, it sounds to me like your value system and your ethics are very different to the company that employs you, there was a bit of a light bulb that went on. It was like, well, actually, yes.
Yes, and you don't need a career counselor to explore the values. In the program I taught at Northwestern, people were working on a master's in counseling psychology, and it was a 3-year program and had many career changers. And I had a lot of lawyers, and I had one actor from Hollywood. And when we went around and we talked about values, there were a lot of them were women. They wanted to help people. They didn't want to book 100 hours a week on contract negotiations or litigation. They wanted to, so they came to be counselors. The Hollywood actor was going to be successful. He was handsome. He was getting parts on television. He was making contacts with the right people in Hollywood. And he quit the whole thing and he came to Chicago and he wanted to be a counselor. And I said, well, why did you leave? He said, I couldn't get along with those people. I was going to be successful, but I couldn't live with those people and their values. It's just not who I am. Yes. He didn't need a career counselor. He just needed a different venue for what he wanted to do.
Yes, to quote Shakespeare, we need to be careful of Faustian pacts, don't we? Selling our souls to the devil in some cases. Richard, it's been a real joy speaking with you and getting a fresh perspective on counselling those in the workplace. And I hope those people are listening, the listener, can take away the fact that you don't have to be a career counsellor to talk about careers and to help people understand the changes that they want to make. So thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Richard. Massive thank you, as always, to you, Rory, for having that interesting job and speaking to those interesting people and bringing us the knowledge there. This is the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We're so grateful you joined us for episode 276.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. And if you like what you've heard, why not share us on your social media platforms and share our podcast? And if you're on a social media platform like iTunes, why not give us a 5-star review? It makes mine and Ken's day. And we started off with student services. We talked about Roger's famous potato metaphor, moving on to ethical, sustainable practice, discussing the reality of reflecting to clients how many sessions they may need, or maybe they may need a different modality. And then moving on to talking to Richard Rotberg, an American psychologist who's written a book on managing career problems in therapy. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.